What's going on, guys? So this is the start of a new series on this channel where we're going to be building the boilerplate for a full stack application using Next.js, GraphQL, and of course TypeScript. So in this video, we're just going to get started and we're going to create our server and our schema. So I'm just going to run create next app with the TypeScript flag, and I'll wait for this to finish. Okay, and I'll just be opening this project in VS Code then. So right off the bat, we just need to install a couple of dependencies. We're going to install micro, which is going to handle our requests, and Apollo server micro, which is going to use micro to handle GraphQL requests. Then we're also going to need to install Nexus so we can write our schema, and cores. And I believe that's all we need for now. And one more thing, let's just do this now. We're going to need the types for cores, so then we can use it with TypeScript. Okay, so now we're ready to get started. And the first thing that we need to do is actually instantiate an instance of Apollo server. So we're going to go here, make a lib folder, and in here, just an Apollo server.ts. Okay, so here I'm going to do const server is equal to new Apollo server. And then this takes in an object, which lets us configure this whole thing. We would need to pass in a schema as well as a context. So this is optional, but we might as well do it now. The good thing about this is that this could be a function, and then this takes in the request from the micro framework. Automatically, it just picks it up for us, and then we can just save that request object in our context in case we ever need it, which is very useful. So now let's get started on making our schemas. But before that, I'm just gonna export this. All right, and so now I'm gonna make a modules folder, and in here GraphQL folder, and in there I'm gonna make a schema.ts. So here we do const schema is equal to make schema from Nexus, and then this takes in an object as well, and we need the types. For now we leave it empty. We'll get to that now, but we'll leave it empty for now. And there's a couple of other things that we need to configure. So first of all, we need to configure a context type. So in order for our context to be typed, which right now it is not, we need to basically make the type for it. So I'm just gonna go here and make a types folder and make a file context.ts. I'm just gonna export an interface called context, which basically just for now has the request, which is a micro request. And so over here, we can say context type, and we need to basically tell Nexus where to find the file and also what's the name of the export. So where to find the file would be under module, and so we would do path.join, and we could actually just import join from path, just keep it more clean. So we would do join on the process.current working directory, and we join that on the types folder and on the file that we just created. And then we have to say basically what's the name of the export. We named our export context. And there's one more thing that we can configure, and it's going to be the output. So the output is basically says where do you want Nexus to generate your types and your GraphQL schema. So we can configure that, and we want our schema to be, and we're going to do process.current working directory, and we want it to be in a generated folder, and this will just be schema.graphql. And then the type gen, so this is basically the types, and then that'll be useful later. And then this will just be nexus-typegen.d.ts, just like that. And so now we can just export our schema and import it over here. So import schema like that, and so now we have the schema. So now let's create our first actually query type so we can fill this up with something. So in this GraphQL module folder, I'm going to create a new file called types.ts, and we can just get started on our first type. So I'm going to do const test query is equal to extend type, and this is using Nexus. So obviously we need to say what type are we extending. We're extending the query type, and we need to use this definition thing, which is basically a function, and then you just define your thing here. So on this type, we want to give it a type of Boolean, and we're going to call it test. And so here we can basically say what arguments does it take. This will be an object. I'll call it just bool, and then this will be a Boolean argument, and I basically want to say it cannot be null. It's a required field. Oops. And then import that. And then let's just put the resolver right here. So this would be a function, and then we just want access to the argument, which will give us bool, and then we just return the same Boolean that's passed in. And we can go up here and just export this like that. And so now we have it, basically we're extending the query type, and we're just adding a Boolean field to it, takes in some arguments, and it's resolved right here basically. And it just returns whatever you pass it in as an argument. We're just going to use this to test out our schema. So over here, what we can do is export. Oh, we already exported it, my bad. So we can do here is we can do import star as types from /types, and then we can just keep it simple like that. Oops. Like that. All right, so now we're ready to actually start exposing our server. So to do that, we will need to go over to pages at API, and I'll just delete this file right here, and we'll make a GraphQL.ts file. So the first thing we need to do is export const config, and basically say that our API, we want body parser to be set to false. And this is basically going to tell Next.js to not try to parse our stuff for us, that we're good on that. We don't need you to parse that. And so the next thing we need to do is export default async function handler. This takes in request, which is a next API request, and result, which is a next API response, my bad. And so basically whenever we get a request to /API/GraphQL, it's going to run this function. So now we're going to actually want to import our server. And then here we would do server.start. Ideally, we wouldn't even have to write this function. We could just export default server.createHandler, and then createHandler returns a function that takes in a request and response. But the thing is that you need to call server.start before calling this. And then if you try to just do .then and then chain this all together, it doesn't work. Next.js just bugs out. And so basically they recommend to do it this way. So this is exactly what we're going to do. So before doing this, you need to do server.start, but this returns a promise. So we can hold on to that promise here and call it server start. And then here we can just make sure that we're not running anything until our server is actually configured. So until that promise is done, we're not doing nothing. And so then here we can do await server.createHandler. This takes in an object, which is, we can configure the path, which is /API/GraphQL. And then here it returns a function, as you can recall. So we're just going to pass in our request and response into it, and then we can just return from that. Okay, so now we've exposed our GraphQL server and we're all ready to go, but there's just one more thing that we need to do. And basically we need to configure cores and set it up as a middleware, because we're going to be testing out our schema using Apollo Studio. And at the moment it wouldn't work because it would be sending a cross-origin request, and we have not configured that to work yet. So I'm just gonna, in this modules folder, create a middleware file. And then in this file, we're gonna have something called init middleware.ts. So basically, we're gonna use cores, which is a middleware that was meant for Express or basically any backend framework that uses the Connect style middleware. But the thing is that Next.js does not use that, so it would not work as it is now. So we need to change some signatures around so we can actually use the cores middleware. And basically, there's a function that Vercel wrote, or Next.js wrote, that does this for us. So I have it open right here, and it's in this repository, and their examples is in this right here. I'll leave a link to it in the description. So here they have this thing that they wrote, and I'll explain to you now exactly what it does. So let's just copy this over, and we're gonna need to just type it and give it some type annotations. So this middleware is a function. This right now, it can be a response of any because we don't know what it could respond with. This is going to be API. No, it's an API request. And that's an API response. Okay, so what this middleware does is it takes, you call this function with your middleware, and it returns to you basically another function. And so whenever you're ready to use it, you would call this function and you would do await because it returns a promise, and you would pass it in the request and response. You await, it runs the middleware with your request response. And if you don't remember, or maybe you don't know, you probably do know, Express uses this next thing. So their middlewares always have a callback or a next, which basically tells Express when to go on to the next middleware. So it takes advantage of that, and it hooks onto that next and gives it a function. And basically, if everything goes well, it just resolves the promise in the next function. So that's basically it. And we can actually start using this. So in this middleware thing, we're going to create a cores file, and just going to import cores from cores. I'm going to do const cores equals init middleware. And then here we would just have our whole configuration. So for example, I'm going to put credentials to true. What else do I want? Oh yeah, origin. And this needs to be https://studio.apollo.graphql.com. And so then we can do export cores. Oops. Okay, and then we would go over here to GraphQL.ts, and then up here we would do await cores, and we pass in our request and response. So here you would put schema wide middleware. So if you want any middleware to run before any GraphQL is processed, you would want to put it right here. And that's why I want to keep this as neat as possible, because later on in the series we're going to use more middlewares and stick them here. Okay, so now if everything went fine, there should be no problem. So I'm just gonna do yarn run dev. There's no errors, so that's a good sign. And we're gonna go over here and just run over to localhost 3000/API/GraphQL. And let's start querying our server. Okay, so now we run test, and let's pass in boolean true. This might be a little small for you, so there you go. There you go. It gives us true back, and when we do false, we get false back. So that means everything went smoothly and everything's working just how it is. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video, and hey, I'll catch you in the next one.